Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the Pullman Police Advisory Committee. Today is Monday, February 10th, 2020. We will start off with roll call. Isabella, would you like to start us off?
Sure. My name is Isabella Macon. I'm a high school representative.
David Macon, a representative for the multicultural members of the community.
I'm Darby Baldwin, Police Department Administrative Assistant.
Gary Jenkins, Police Chief.
Alex Pan, ASWSU representative.
Barbara Hammond, College Hill representative.
Eric Tetzloff, Business, Community, and Vice Chair.
I am Stephanie Rink. I am the Pullman School District parent and also the chair of the committee.
Good evening. My name is Kamitra Keeney, and I represent Black Faculty and Staff Association.
Nathan Dean, alternative to the parent of a public school child.
I'm Little Rink, alternate to the high school representative.
I'm Krista Gross. I'm the at-large member.
I'm Mira Bakshi, the GPS state representative.
Jaya Sivakumar from Military Hill representative.
Great, thank you all for coming. Our last meeting was December 9th. January was canceled, and I'm sure everyone has read the minutes. Do we have any questions, concerns, or edits about the minutes proposed? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move approval.
I second that.
All those in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes passed. Okay, our next order of business is the red light camera discussion with Megan Parks. Megan, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so hi, my name is Megan Parks, and I am the Research Fellow for the Public Safety Fellowship. I am a student at WSU in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. Today I'm just going to talk to you about red light cameras, just kind of an overview of what they are and how they work and a lot of different things like that. So just to start, really, what are red light cameras? So some cameras use embedded vehicle detectors wired to signal controllers that can detect if a vehicle has entered the intersection when the signal is red, while other cameras use above ground sensors. The roadside mounting cameras then record the images of the violation. In Washington State, we only record rear end images of the vehicle, and this is because our photos can't reveal the face of the driver or of passengers. Images then are reviewed by trained police officers or authorized employees. They review every picture to ensure that it was a violation, and then citations are issued. Washington State issues citations only to registered owners. The registered owner is held responsible. They can contest the violation or identify another driver of the cited vehicle, and this is different in some other states. The issue is given to the driver. And this is related to why in Washington we can only take rear end camera pictures, and this is because we're only interested in the registered owner of the vehicle. So what is the goal of red light cameras? Basically the goal of these cameras is to reduce the number of red light violations, which we would hope would potentially reduce collisions, injuries, and fatalities at intersections. Over time, we would hope that these cameras would change drivers' behaviors and then create a safer community. I include here what should the goal be of red light cameras, and I just think that's an interesting consideration kind of as I move throughout the presentation. Is the goal to actually reduce violations or to reduce actual accidents? So why are red light cameras implemented? So here are the numbers across the United States. These are numbers gathered in 2017 from the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety. And you can see that these numbers are pretty high. Traffic fatalities involving signalized intersections, that's 3,271 deaths in 1 year. And so this is the big reason why people are interested in red light cameras. But the responsibility of reducing these numbers then will fall on the shoulders of police agencies in these communities. We know that many agencies tend to need more officers and resources than they have already, so it's really impossible for there to be an officer at every intersection in order to enforce these violations. So they're really implemented to increase public safety while not draining law enforcement agencies' staffing resources. It is also, red light cameras also do generate quite a bit of revenue, and for cities, this has really become a major controversy surrounding the use of red light cameras, which I'll touch on about that in a bit. So what are the costs of red light cameras? There's a few different red light camera vendors. The major ones are American Traffic Solutions, Redflex Traffic Solutions, and Affiliated Computer Services. The cost of these systems are largely based on the equipment choices, the operational and administrative characteristics of the program, and different arrangements with contractors. Also, red light camera contracts themselves also vary. Some contracts require cities to actually share the revenue with the camera vendor on a per-ticket basis or through other formulas as a percentage of the revenue. This type of contract is less popular. Other contracts, the city pays a monthly fee to the camera vendor, and this is for maintenance, upkeep, and other services provided by the vendor. So just for an example, in 2018 in Linwood, Washington, they were using 16 cameras. They ended up issuing 34,000 citations in 2018. They had a revenue of $3.4 million, and over 600,000 of that went to the vendor for their monthly fees, and that's about 18% of the revenue that was brought in. So contracts in Washington State, under our state law, only the second type of contract is allowed, meaning that vendors cannot receive compensation based on the portion of the fines or penalties imposed or based on the revenue generated by the red light camera. So in Washington State, we only allow for the monthly fees of the upkeep and maintenance of the system. I found that most contracts in Washington State were with American Traffic Solutions or with Redflex. So who does the work after red light cameras are implemented? The workload really falls on two different groups, and one of these groups is police agencies. This is an example here of Seattle's contract with American Traffic Solutions, and it says, it explains in there that the police department in the city must process each potential violation in accordance with state and/or city ordinances within 3 business days of its appearance in the police review queue. And this is another service provided by the vendor. It allows the police departments to access this website where they can go in and process these violations, and so that's something else. That's another example of what might be included in those monthly fees. So that's how officers would go in and review every single citation that comes through, just to ensure that it actually was a violation. The courts are also responsible for a portion of the workload as well. This is an example out of that same contract here, and it explains that the courts must facilitate the provision of a judge or hearing officer and court facilities to schedule and hear disputed citations. The court also has to handle any inbound and outbound phone calls and correspondence with the defendants who have questions about disputes and any other issues related to their citations. It also states that after expiration of a second notice, the court is responsible for pursuing delinquent collections of unpaid notices. So this was just an example in Renton, Washington. Their court clerks entered 48,271 citations in 2018 alone. And the court clerk explains that the employees worked a lot of overtime. They worked weekends and nights, and they actually ended up hiring 2 new full-time employees to kind of assist with this workload. So this map shows the states in 2019 that were using red light cameras, speed cameras, or both of these cameras. So here in the light blue, you can see states that are using red light cameras. New Mexico is the state only using speed cameras, and the green states are using both red light and speed, while the gray states are the states in 2019 that were not operating either program. On the right is a list of the cities in Washington State that use red light cameras right now. It's interesting to note that the population for these cities range from Fife, Washington is about 9,000, and Seattle is close to 600,000. So it's just interesting. So red light cameras in Washington State, the use of red light cameras is restricted in ways by our state laws. They're permitted in locations with where 2 arterial roads intersect. And as I mentioned, the citations are issued to the registered owner, and citations are treated similar to a parking ticket. So no points are issued against the driver's license, and no insurance penalty is assessed. From what I could find, the fines range from between $48 to $250, but in state law, specifies that the fine cannot exceed the amount of a fine issued for other parking infractions within the jurisdiction. So this graph is showing the number of communities in the United States that have active red light camera programs. As you can see, between like 2005 and 2011, there was definitely an increase in the number of programs being deployed across the United States. And we're actually now seeing a decline in the use of red light camera programs, which is pretty interesting. So why are less communities using red light cameras? And there's 3 reasons I really want to touch on. The first is safety effectiveness of these red light cameras has really been questioned by researchers and by community members recently. Secondly, the amount of revenue generated by these programs has been criticized by the public as well. To these first 2 points, something else that's really come to light recently in research is that removing red light camera programs can actually cause issues with city revenues, and this is because if they become dependent on that mass amount of revenue coming in, it can cause issues once it's retracted. And then it can also, some research is showing that it can cause safety issues once a program is then removed. And lastly, I'll discuss briefly some issues with procedural due process that have been raised as citizens are disputing citations and being charged fines in communities where pretty severe misconduct has been identified. So what does the research say? Overall, the research on the effectiveness of red light cameras has been a source of controversy in the research community, and this is largely due to the diverse range of the methodologies used to measure their effectiveness, along with the differing conclusions that are drawn from these studies. So first, do red light cameras reduce violations? There's surprisingly not as much research focuses on the reduction in violations as because everyone's really interested in if they reduce accidents or not. But one study conducted evaluated the first year of Arlington County, Virginia's red light program. And what they found was that after the first year of implementation, there were significant reductions in the odds of violations occurring. And so to do this, they measured the reductions based on the time that it surpassed after the light had turned red. And so after 0.5 seconds after the light turned red, there was a 39% reduction in the odds of violations. At least 1 second after the light turned red, there was a 48% reduction. And at least 1.5 seconds after the light turned red, there was an 86% reduction in the odds of violations. And what this is really telling us, interestingly, is that if at 0.5 seconds after the light turned red, there was a 39% reduction in red light violations, those are the individuals who think they could have made it. Maybe it was a near miss. They could be the individuals that think maybe it's safer to drive through the light instead of slam on their brakes. Whereas the individuals running lights 1.5 seconds after the light turned red might be the more severe offenders, more intentional, and it's a good finding that they're significantly reducing the violations of those individuals. So overall, they found that violations at red light camera intersections declined significantly, and that the reductions in odds of violations were greater the longer after the light turned red. So this is when violations are more likely to cause crashes, so that is a positive finding. So do red light cameras reduce crashes? So here I've tried to summarize the research that exists on this question. So in the left-hand column, you'll see the article in the year that it was conducted, and across the top are the outcomes that are often measured in red light camera studies. And as you can see, studies differ on what their outcome measure is and what they're interested in studying. So I've color-coded the findings. So the purple boxes indicate a decrease in the above noted variable, where the blue boxes indicate an increase in the above noted variables. So you can see here the first study, they found actually that red light cameras had a 1.6 increase on total crashes, and I think this would probably likely be due to the 16.5% increase that you see in rear end crashes when red light cameras are implemented. The next study of the Federal Highway Administration, they found decreases in right angle crashes, right angle injury crashes, but they too found increases in both rear end crashes and rear end injury crashes. Hu and Caccino, they found a decrease in the total fatal crashes, and while Goldenbell, Daniels, and Schermers in 2019 found a decrease in the total crashes, decrease in right-angle crashes, but they too also found an increase in rear-end crashes, and they actually saw a 32% increase in rear-end crashes. Just for another example, in Spokane, Washington, this was their findings 4 years after they implemented a red light camera program from 2008 to 2012. They saw a 24% decrease in crashes on average per year, about a 53% decrease in red light related crashes, about a 51% decrease in T-bone crashes, and a 41% increase in rear end crashes. But as you can see, if you look at the raw numbers, they're pretty small, but it's pretty consistent with the other research as well. So, like I said, now as more and more communities are removing their red light camera programs, researchers have been interested in what happens in terms of crashes when they're actually removed. So these researchers studied 14 cities that terminated their red light cameras between 2010 and 2014, and they found that in comparison to cities that were matched based on a number of different characteristics, that red light running crashes specifically were 30% higher than those cities after the cameras were turned off, and 16% higher for fatal crashes at signalized intersections in comparison to these other cities that had continuous red light camera programs going. So really overall, the research on red light cameras shows us that they do reduce red light violations and crashes, but they actually do increase rear end collisions. And then there's research now telling us that when red light cameras are discontinued, the crash rates may increase. So as far as revenue generation goes, many new news stories have been coming out regarding public concerns and also about different leaders in communities using inappropriate techniques to increase revenue generation. Just as an example, I thought this was interesting in the contract between ATS and Seattle. They specifically state that although revenue is not a justification for the implementation of red light cameras, and then ... and then they go on to discuss the possibilities of the revenue generation that it would bring in. Between 2006 and 2007, the city of Seattle made over $1 million from the payment of these fines, and they had a payment rate of about 73%. And in this case, during that same time frame, red light running decreased by 50%, but the number of accidents actually didn't change. Just another example, between 2008 and 2013 in Spokane, Washington, they had 10 intersections monitored by 15 cameras, and they had a revenue of nearly $2 million for those years with an average payment rate of 74%. It's also important to consider the number of violations that are challenged, mitigated, or dismissed. So in Spokane in 2012, about 17% of citations were dismissed, and that was 629 out of the 3,739 notices that were challenged. So issues have also been brought to light concerning the fundamental fairness and procedural due process with red light cameras. So there's two arguments that are typically made, and the first is that, like in Washington, when tickets are sent to a registered owner, it's not necessarily the person running the light, and then this burden would then fall on the owner to prove that they're not driving, and that this might be a violation of our innocent until proven guilty principle. So this is one argument that's made pretty commonly. And the second one is that when contractors receive a cut of the revenue, this is really problematic because it gives an incentive to contractors to kind of rig the system in order to increase the revenue, and this generates public distrust, obviously, and it really undermines public safety because in these cases they're doing things like shortening the time of yellow lights in order to increase revenue. So there are alternatives to red light cameras, and based on the research, they're actually more effective than actually implementing red light camera programs. So the first one is to increase the yellow light time. A study out of the Texas Transportation Institution found that a 1 second increase in the yellow light time produced a 53% reduction in violations and a 40% reduction in collisions. Most people would just say, well, aren't they just going to adapt to the new yellow light time? The minimal amount of research that exists shows that drivers do not adapt to the length of yellow light time, but there's more research that needs to be done in that area. The second one is add an all red clearance interval. This is a brief period where all lights at the intersection are red, so they're not switching one red to green to the next one. The AAA of Michigan found a 47% decrease in crashes when they implemented this. And then third, just make traffic lights more visible, and this could be making them bigger, doing something like adding a metal backer to deflect the glare, or just removing any other visual obstructions that might be there, like trees or something like that. Overall, another alternative would just be improving intersections for motorists. So this could be improving the signage, building new turning lanes, or maybe putting in new advanced warning lights. And then the next one is retime traffic signals, and I thought this one was really interesting. So here, engineers can actually adjust the timing of lights to reduce the number of red lights a driver encounters. And so this could potentially reduce congestion, travel time, gas consumption, and it could really decrease driver frustration because they're not constantly hitting one red light after another. And then this next one, traffic signal countdown timer, it is actually prohibited by our DOT, but I thought it was just a really interesting concept to think about. And it's used in 24 other countries, and there's actually a timer right by the lights, and it's counting down not only the red light, but each light, green, yellow, red, it gives you a countdown up there right by the light. Oregon State tried to do a study on this, and they used a driving simulator, and they found that it does increase the chances of a driver stopping by 13%, and that overall drivers were just stopping earlier. So just other considerations in conclusion. I think something that's important to consider is taking a problem-solving approach to red light running instead of a more punitive approach. So if we think about red light cameras, that is definitely a punitive approach because it's just you're citing people when it happens. But a more problem-solving approach could cause us to start thinking about issues more holistically, really. And for example, I would say there's kind of two factors that play into this, and the first would be understanding why people, and this is very specific to community, so it would be why are people in this community or whatever community, why are they running red lights? And I think that the first factor could be social, and this is just thinking about things like individuals are just having this sense of urgency, or we now have this freedom of behavior, so maybe they're thinking, I can make it this time, I can really get away with it this time, things like that. And then practical factors, so these are things like when cities have increasing populations and the infrastructure has just not been able to keep up, and then also lights not being timed properly throughout a city. So when you combine social factors with practical factors, drivers would likely feel frustrated, and then you combine that with their sense of urgency, and it could really encourage red light running. So, for example, if you're in a city and there's a lot of traffic and you're feeling frustrated and you can't get from point A to point B on time like you normally have, that could just be a combination of both these social and practical factors. Another interesting thing to start considering is who's running red lights and trying to understand that a little better. A study conducted in 2017 analyzed fatal red light runnings involving multiple vehicle crashes, and they found that the drivers were more likely to be young males, more likely to have prior crashes or alcohol-impaired driving convictions. They were more likely to be speeding or alcohol-impaired at the time of the crash, and they were less likely to have a driver's license. So these are just two things. Why are people running red lights and who's running red lights are just two steps of really holistically thinking about an issue prior to taking a punitive response to them. So what is the goal of red light cameras? I think when considering these goals, it's important to be thinking about things like whether we're trying to really reduce violations or actually reduce crashes. What's the potential workload for agencies, and is it feasible? What the public concerns are surrounding red lights and how to maintain or gain and maintain public support of the programs. What the potential issues would be if they're discontinued, and lastly, there is really a difference between taking a problem-solving approach to issues versus taking a more punitive response. So when red light cameras, when these programs are considered, there's very important steps to successful implementation. I'm not going to go into detail about all of these, but there's just a few I wanted to highlight that I think are really crucial to successful implementation. The first is to identify the safety problem and determine whether red light cameras are an appropriate solution. So I think first and foremost, it would just be collecting data on the problem intersections in a community and determine whether or not this type of intervention actually makes sense. Are there intersections that are actually dangerous enough to require this kind of program? How many accidents are happening? And then thinking about when are they happening and who's involved when they do happen. And I also believe that other alternatives should be considered as well when we're thinking about these problem intersections. The second is to identify and enlist support of key players. Third is review legislative and regulatory needs. Establish program goals. And then fifth, choose a camera system and a vendor based on the jurisdiction's objectives, priorities, and their resources. The sixth step is to initiate a multifaceted public awareness campaign prior to program start and continue that throughout the life of the program. And I think this is really important. So from the start, if the data shows that this is a problem intersection for the community, then this data, I believe, should be disseminated to the community. This would raise awareness as well as potentially help gain support for the community. If members see the purpose of the red light camera program as well as the value of it, then they might get on board and support it. Seventh is to evaluate and select sites. Eighth is to implement the program using best management practices. And 9, predict, acknowledge, and address public concerns. This is important throughout the life of the program, and it really speaks to just being transparent when programs are implemented within a community and being open to the public about the data on the success or not success of the program. And then lastly, evaluate and monitor the program's results. Overall, programs will have the best chance of earning community support if they are designed to improve safety and not generate revenue. So that's just something that really came out in the research. So here, substantiating the problem, this really speaks back to step 1 of the implementation process. This is really just identifying the safety problem first and deciding if red light cameras are an appropriate solution. So here are the traffic infractions and citations in Pullman, Washington between 2010 and 2018. So this is a start. Obviously, it would be important to substantiate the number of accidents within these traffic accidents. And then from there, understanding at what intersections are these accidents happening. And just really pinpointing where these problem intersections are and what are we considering a problem intersection. So in conclusion, red light cameras are widely used, but they are declining. The effectiveness is generally supported, but we do see that they actually increase rear-end crashes. There is public discontentment with revenue generation and a lack of procedural due process in some cases. There are more effective alternatives than red light cameras, and either way, I believe that proper and careful implementation is key. So, thank you.
Nice.
So, Megan, I have a question, and this might be for you and also for Chief Jenkins. With your, the last graph that you showed, so I'm assuming that we don't have any data in Pullman on red light crashes. Is that correct?
We could obtain that data.
So we just geocode all the locations.
Well, but just because it occurred in an intersection doesn't mean it was a signalized violation. So.
Would that be in the officer notes?
Well, we would have, it would, yeah. I mean, it would take some doing to collect that information, but information's available.
I wonder, with the 2 intersections that I constantly see these red light infractions on, is it Grand and Main? Right by Rico's, that one? And then the other one is Bishop and, is that Main again? You take a right to Moscow, left to other. Constant, we even saw one coming here tonight. And so looking at those, if let's say if Pullman wanted to do this, would those be 2 intersections that they would be looking at, or other possibilities of doing the longer yellow light? But with that, I have noticed sitting at that light multiple times, it's not completely always even when you're sitting there waiting for you to get a green light, and sometimes it's really fast, and sometimes you sit there and age 10 years.
Right.
How do you work all that in with creating a solution for the community.
So I think first would be, step one would be understanding what intersections are problem intersections, and if those were, I would say to consider every other alternative prior to, just because these other alternatives do show that they actually are more effective in some ways, without the buy-in that you have to put in with these red light camera programs. So I think step one would be really identifying that it is necessary to take steps, and then, yeah.
And my last question, and then I'll open up to everybody else, though, is when you do have is that, you said the back end photo that you take the back end? If two cars went at the same time, so they both decided to run the red light, is it able to capture each car?
I'm not sure about that. I didn't see anything like that when I came across the...
Because that'd be interesting, because I've seen that, well, I've seen it many times too.
Right?
And Grand, Maine. Any other questions for?
What, I have one, talking about revenue, but what's the upfront cost? How long does it take to have earned enough through revenue to pay off the upfront cost?
That's a good question. Finding the actual cost of these programs is actually really hard. People aren't that open about it. But you can find the cost of like what it would be to just get the actual equipment at an intersection, and I mean that's about all I could find, so I couldn't really figure out how long it would take for it to pay off or start generating that revenue. Okay. But yeah.
So I know you were talking about the social versus the practical.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is interesting in Pullman, I can get from one side of so in summertime, I can get from one side of WTS to the other quite effective and efficient time, and then school starts, and all of a sudden I'm thinking this should only take me X amount of minutes, and it ends up being double, triple, and then I'm having to stop multiple times. So in your studies and your research, did you find expectation or did you study a town that was similar to Pullman where it empties and then all of a sudden it fills up, and see if those crashes were more or less?
No, but that would be really interesting, especially like you said, like expectations. If you're used to this amount of time to get from point A to point B, and then suddenly that's totally disrupted. But no, I couldn't find anything specific to that. The research actually there isn't a whole bunch of it out there, but yeah, that would be really interesting to look at.
So what are the other costs, right? So the implementation, as you said, is not simply purchasing the cameras.
Yeah.
What are the other associated costs with a program like a red light camera system?
Well, the vendor then would help to maintain it, so that would be a part of the monthly fees. And like I said, those other other services provided by the vendor. So these are the platforms for which the police department can use to go in and verify violations. So that would be part of the fee to keep that. And well, before you put anything on a light pole, it's going to take a lot of planning with the town, and a lot of planning. Like, you can't just put a camera up there or anything. It's going to take a lot of cost that way and time.
Some of that would be state highway too, correct? Would the state have to be involved with some of our stuff in the city?
Yes. Yeah.
One thing I'm curious procedurally, if you know, so the ticket registered owners, what about when the owner is a business? So there is no person who owns the vehicle. Do you know what the procedure is? Anyone?
I know that one.
Okay.
If they go to the business itself, then you would have to give it to your employee.
Okay.
We ran into that quite a bit more.
Because the truck number is on the back?
Well, there's a license plate.
In Oregon, you do front and back. So we could see, we'd see our license plate plus the number of our pickup. Then you also see the picture of the person driving. So it's pretty easy to see who's driving.
I'm just thinking from so when you get a ticket, it goes on your record. A business doesn't have a driving record per se like that.
I don't don't think in Oregon it wasn't like a record offense.
It wasn't that kind of
No.
thing, I see.
A license.
Yeah, I think Megan pointed out in Washington, it's
Yeah.
not a moving violation technically, right?
I see, so they don't, so if a policeman stops you for running a red light, it would be a moving violation, right? So, but in this case, it's not a moving violation, okay, I see.
I have one more question. So I know this is off the cuff, but so a lot of times there's racial profiling, right? And so they'll say, you profiled me. So now you have this technology that should be absolutely unbiased. Did you, across your studies, come across anything where there was something wonky about, any kind of racial profiling, or people feeling, certain populations feeling like they had been targeted more, or were the cameras put in certain locations where they were going to generate more revenue out of a certain neighborhood? Like, were there more red light cameras in a maybe more urban, lower SES versus more of a affluent neighborhood? I know it's a weird question, but you see where I'm going, like to generate.
It's not a
revenue.
weird question. This is a good question to ask.
Okay. but did you come across that, in your studies?
I think just broadly I came across that they're in highly populated areas for the most part. That's why I thought it was interesting that there was one in Fife, Washington with a population of 9,000. That kind of struck me. That's pretty interesting to implement in a community that small. But overall, yeah, they're in, the SeaTac area, and of course they're going to have more problems with red light runners, so that would give them incentive to do a program like this. But as far as like SES goes, I didn't come across anything specific to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like with Fife, and I don't know exactly where that's situated, but I suspect it's part of the greater Seattle metropolitan area. So they probably have a lot of transient traffic going through their community because of that. So, so I think you
that makes
have to
sense.
look at that as well.
Any other further questions?
Can these cameras be used for like other like criminal investigations as well, like for like a stolen car or something like that?
So I was going to make a comment on that. First of all, Megan, that was really good research. I really enjoyed it, and I learned some things as well. And when you were talking about the restrictions on it, it is restricted by law in Washington that you can only use that information for that violation. So if someone's doing a criminal investigation and they want to find out if a certain suspect vehicle was in that vicinity, they could not, even with the search warrant, could not get that information. There's actually a bill pending right now that would allow law enforcement to obtain that information with a search warrant on a criminal investigation, but right now they cannot do it.
So Chief Jenkins, is this something that you would want to have more data for Pullman of looking at these, and not for the red light cameras, but maybe possibly syncing up our lights a little bit better? And
Well, so yeah, that's, well, first of all, I think the overall, Megan brought up some good points about looking at whether you're trying to address just violations or crashes. And really, the goal of any type of traffic enforcement should be to reduce traffic collisions and injuries and fatalities as a result of collisions. That should always be your goal. The city engineering department have, in the past few years, upgraded their signalization system, and I think they're currently looking at getting a grant that would further improve it so that it would help synchronize the lights a lot better so that it would reduce the amount of times that you would come up on a red signal. I was driving up Grand the other day thinking, I wish I'd hurry up and get this because it just seemed like it was sync for me to hit every time.
I'm pretty sure Maine right now is stop everyone every time.
So now when we have a home football game, they do make changes in the synchronizations, such as at Terraview and 270 for cars coming out of WSU and at Stadium Way and 270. Those intersections are all set so that to help empty cars out of the WSU. The problem we get to is there's just so many exits out of the city, and so they try to synchronize things on Main and at Grand and at Davis, and it's just really hard just the way that the streets are set up. But there are systems out there that can improve that synchronization. But it all costs money.
Are they the same vendors that own the red lights? Red light?
No, that'd be
I
different.
don't know if they were just add-ons to the same light vendors or not.
Yeah, I don't think they're the same. I think the vendors that Megan has talked about, that's
their
really a
specialty.
specialty that they do.
I guess one more question I have, like regarding like when WSU students come, along that same way, they always have those like, I guess like speedometers saying like, oh, you're going over or whatnot. Did you look into like a study where like that helped like reduce the amount of like red lights?
So we have put a few of those in town. Actually, we haven't. Our Public Works Department has in areas where we have regular complaints of speeding. And I know like on Center Street is one of them. And, you know, I think the results are a little bit mixed. Initially, it had an impact on a lot of the vehicles on Center. And then I think over time, it's kind of evened out a little bit. And so the effectiveness maybe has been diluted some. So they were looking at actually other methods to help reduce speed, such as roundabouts. And then I think there's a plan to put a roundabout on Center and see the effectiveness of that.
Like Center and right by the light there, or?
No, actually, well, there's going to be a signal at Center and Grant.
Sorry, I mean right by the lights, the signal that tells you your speed.
There's two speed
I know,
ones,
there's-
one's going up and one's
Yeah,
going
right.
down.
I think they're looking at putting it at a Tawny.
Tony, that's what I was wondering, yeah. Because sort of you got your straight section right in there, and so, you know.
Well, and people going west are hitting the gas to get up the hill, and then once it levels out, they...
Keep going?
Or even if you back up, some
Yeah.
still going to be going over the speed limit.
Yeah.
Is it better to put one of those great big fat speed bumps there that make people slow down, or?
Part of the problems with those are when they have to plow the streets. They're difficult. If you go on, is it Harvest, where they had a pedestrian, a crosswalk, and they had some delineators that came out in the street a little bit to narrow the street. That's another way that is called a traffic calming measure.
We did that in Terraview too, recently with the new school going in.
Has that worked at all?
I don't know if that's worked, but I know that some residents on Harvest have parked vehicles on the street to reduce the roadway width, and I think they've seen an improvement in the speed of vehicles as a result of that.
Any other questions? Megan, that was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
very much.
One thing I wasn't thinking about, or I hadn't seen, was the countdown that you were talking about.
Yeah.
But it made me think of, I don't know if you've noticed, but the city's recently added pedestrian crosswalk countdowns for how long you can cross the street. And I find myself, as I'm coming up to an intersection, looking at that to kind of give me an idea of how much time I got.
How much time you have to run across?
The thing is, it's interesting because Moscow has the four-way red for like, I don't know, 2 seconds, whatever it is. Yeah, it is interesting. I think it definitely helps to keep people out of the intersection and from, you know.
I think once we look beyond violations and we start looking at crashes and injuries, and Jake, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just off the top of my head, I don't think we have a lot of collisions that are the result of somebody running a red light.
I think that number would be very small.
Yeah.
I think most of it's because we've trained ourselves to wait before we go, because we don't want to get hit.
I think most of our collisions actually are more weather-related than anything else.
Perfect. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, Chief Jenkins with our Police Department update.
So I think last time we talked about the second commander position, and we were doing a recruitment. So that recruitment, the application period is over, and we're going to be holding an assessment center on April 1st. We currently we had 10 total applications, and those were narrowed down to 3. And so we're going to have an assessment center for 3 people. The same company that did our assessment center for Sergeant a couple of years ago is going to help us put together this assessment center as well. And so we'll have an assessment center in the morning, and then in the afternoon, Jake and I will be interviewing each candidate for about an hour and a half. And then we'll move forward from there. Police officer positions, Last time I reported, I think Kayla Nuxall was in the academy. She's since graduated and is now back here in Pullman and going through her in-house field training program. Joseph Guile was hired. He starts the academy March 4th and will graduate July 10th. And then we also hired Jared Hulk. He currently works for Adams County, Idaho Sheriff's Department. However, he hasn't been to their academy yet, and so when we hire him, we'll send him to an academy that starts April 1st, and he'll graduate August 7th. We have one other job offer out that we haven't gotten a final commitment on, so counting that job offer, we have that position and one other position to be fully staffed at 33 sworn. So we do have still a continuous recruitment. We have set up our next interviews for March 25th and 26th. And so that will fill the rest of the vacancies, and it will establish a list for any future vacancies that we have over the next year or so. We are updating our lateral applicant process with Civil Service Commission. Currently, all applicants, whether they're a lateral or a police officer from another agency or an entry level without any experience, have to go through the same process through public safety testing. They take a written test, a physical abilities test, and then those that pass that then move on to an interview panel. We're changing it so that lateral applicants do not have to go through the public safety part of it. The reason we're doing that is because one of the reasons we have them do a physical abilities test is it's exactly the same as the academy, and so we need to ensure that entry-level people can pass the academy test and make it through the academy. So a lateral won't have to do that because they go through an equivalency academy that's 2 weeks without a physical part to it. And then the written part, that's generally just to find out if someone would be qualified to be a police officer. And so if we're hiring someone that's already been a police officer for a certain amount of time, we can determine that by doing their background. So we're hoping this will entice more current officers in other departments to apply here, since they won't have to go through that entry-level part. And we still will be able to do enough of a background to determine if they'll be a good police officer for us, which also includes, our background includes a physical exam where the doctor has our job description, so they'll be able to tell us whether that person is physically fit to do the job. That's all of my update.
Is your compensation packages for entry-level police officers competitive with Eastern Washington agencies?
Well, we are for our region. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure once you get out of, say, Whitman County, Spokane, Asotin, that area. I think we're generally competitive for the Eastern region. We're not at all for Western Washington. Yeah. Of course, the pay over there is much different than here. You know, I guess we have different recruitment strategies here because we're not in a big metropolitan area where we can hire someone that can come to work here without having to move. You know, most of the people that we hire are either already living here or have made some type of commitment to move to this area. And so it's a little bit different strategy for finding applicants.
To say that you had a great presentation at APAC back in December. Thank you for coming and presenting.
Oh, good. Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Interesting hearing about the differences between WSU and Pullman. Sounds good. Any other comments or anything for Chief Jenkins? All right, moving right along, our constituencies poll. Adam, would you like to start us off? Got any updates for us?
Sure. I don't really have anything for suicide.
Anything else? Right. Not yet. I think it's supposed to.
Possibly Thursday.
Well, Thursday now says rain, but Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Oh no, now Thursday changed to snow, so I changed it. Sorry. So.
I forward your weekly notice to a couple people, and they appreciate that. That's what I've heard recently.
Good. Yeah, and feel free to forward that to anyone that you'd like to. I mean, that's all public information.
Okay, good.
It's all quiet.
We like quiet.
Nothing to report for Military Hill.
Nothing to report for GBSA?
I have a conference I'm going to for all of REMAX worldwide, but more importantly, I'm going to be doing standing at a booth for the Beverly Carter Foundation. I think if you remember when I introduced myself, I talked about realtor safety. So it will be many days. It will be exhausting, and I will hear lots of horrible stories about situations where people have been in homes just doing their jobs, just trying to help clients, and something horrible happens. But it's very fulfilling to be there and just, not be asking for anything, not be selling anything, just giving out tips and saying, gosh, go home safely at night. So anyhow, that'll be at the end of the month. And Journey is coming to the REMAX conference, so I'm going to go see Journey also. So, if I'm not too exhausted, but that's all I have.
And we're coming to speak with
Yes, and Chief Jenkins and the Code Enforcement Officer are coming to the Whitman County Association of Realtors in May. Have they contacted you about that?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, they will. They're usually pretty dependable. But I was hoping, we had such a good presentation about snow removal back in, was it November, October? And I thought, gosh, that'd be really great for the agents to know and landlords, but our group isn't on the ball, so as much as we'd like to be. We're transitioning associations to be handled in a different way, but I took Chief Jenkins up on his offer to come and talk to us, so I'm really excited about that. Thank you.
I have nothing to report for the high school right now.
I have nothing to report for my constituency.
For me, I just want to say WSU, this is Black History Month, so WSU is putting on a fantastic spread of events that are there to educate and feed the spirit and soul. So feel free to, kind of see if you can stop into one of those. Vibes will be in town this weekend. It is an urban kind of students of color coming to see what, higher education has to offer. And Black Faculty Staff Association will be supporting them and trying to kind of be role models and answer questions and be kind of a mentor and support for them.
Did you go see Kamal Bell when he was here a few weeks ago?
I did not.
I bet that was good. And second question, what is the high school doing for Black History Month? Do they have programs and events? Yeah, they do, Krista. Yes, I do. They have to, come on.
I think there's Black Union Club or something.
Do they give an assembly or anything?
I don't think so.
I sure hope you're wrong.
I don't
You've
know.
just been singing K-pop and not been paying attention.
It's all that K-pop singing and dancing.
I really hope that they're doing something. They gotta be doing something.
Probably will. I can
Okay.
talk to the ASB Wednesday.
Yeah, and help bring awareness to that. Awesome.
Well, I don't have anything to report, though our May meeting, we might, because we will have a permit driver on the road, so be careful out there. I won't mention any names.
Oh, in May?
Yeah. She starts her class when? May 1st? I can't remember.
Oh, good for you.
I was going to say, my impression is that residents, at least where I see, have been more more concerned about their sidewalks in the snow. So I think that at least some places the word's getting out. So
We've been providing some incentive.
Yeah. I heard something about a cougar on State Street. Have you, or somewhere on Sunset Hill? Have you?
There was someone reported to Fish and Wildlife cougar sighting.
Awesome. I've got the email.
And was it State Street?
It was behind Old European.
Well, behind Old European, yeah. Was it? We haven't confirmed it.
That is
close. That's all.
Just hungry.
Nothing really from College Hill except a confirmation of the harvest people parking on the street and then having it narrow, slowing people down. I mean, it's really narrow up where I live, but everybody is really driving slowly and pulling over and letting people go by. So in spite of the congestion, it's been fine.
Harvest is the one that goes up to the middle school, right? Off Bishop and goes up that way?
Yeah, it turns
Okay.
Carroll Star and then turns into Crestview Rose. It
Oh,
goes
okay.
past the middle school, yeah.
I just take that one
Comes from Bishop.
every day, dropping kids off, so.
I have nothing to report for ASWCU.
So nothing to report for the multicultural members, though I'd like the committee and the police department to explore opportunities to improve visibility of people that are walking. So we've seen this in some of the issues, and when we drive, we now count the amount of people that are wearing all black clothes walking.
Yeah.
I don't think the way to approach this is from a punitive standpoint. I think that we can, if there's a way we can find grant money or to work with industry or nonprofits to create, to give out have an officer see somebody that's wearing all black walking down at 9 o'clock and there's no, say, hey, do you know that you should have reflective gear? Here's something for you. I'd like to approach it that way, but I can't tell you the amount of times that we've almost hit somebody there's no light and they're not wearing any reflective gear. And I think that particularly in this period of time, we see it and posted videos about it and issues that I think we can take a smart, proactive solution. So I'd like to explore opportunities for that.
Would you like to research some opportunities that are out there and bring it back to us to discuss?
I could absolutely have my research fellow do that.
Well, from Pullman High School, we have an orchestra concert on the 24th, and we have the Tolo dance on the following Saturday. And what you guys were talking about with the Black History Month thing, we do have a club, as Gwen said, the Black Student Union. I think that they're planning something, but it's been debated on.
Okay, good, thank you.
Do the high school and WSU work together on any kind of cultural? That's what I don't know. It just seems like there's two different entities, but it'd be neat to see some kind of
I don't
collection.
think they do. I do know that the ASB leaders are trying to discuss bringing a speaker in about
Suicide
prevention and awareness. And I have asked our ASB representative to also discuss with ASWCU and GPSA to see if they can combine that. But I don't know where that stands at the moment.
Right now, we just have to get it approved by Mr. Polstad. We need our meeting to come up. So far, it's been postponing every week. So I'm going to go in probably tomorrow or Wednesday to make sure our meeting needs to be scheduled. And then after that, it's finance and all that stuff.
It might be something that you can bring to Mr. Polstad to discuss options of working with WSU and bringing in certain events.
Certainly be interesting to see.
You can do some research. Okay, anything else?
The only thing else I would mention is, I don't know how much we've talked about the fellowship here with this group, but Dr. Macon put together something that's it's really, I think, cutting edge and something that we're going to see more of, but it's unique, I think, right now, where he's partnering with regional law enforcement agencies to provide a research fellow to do analysis and assist us with things that we really don't have the capacity to do because of the size of our agency. And she's been helping us with a municipal court study, and we already have a list of other projects that we want to get done, and it's things that we wouldn't be able to do on our own. So Megan's doing a really good job, and I'm really glad to see the quality of her work here, and so looking forward to doing some more things with her and Dr. Macon.
Yeah, it's been unique. The university, they were so committed. The grad school committed 3 years of tuition.
Aren't we
Nice.
doing 2 fellows still?
The goal is to expand it. Right now, as expensive as tuition is, they were willing to give me 3 full years of tuition. So that was tremendous.
Yeah.
So they're committed.
I really do like looking at the different resources that the city can use, the Pullman School District can go at the university, working together with all the resources, because if they're out there, if we just work together, I think we can come up with some really good solutions to some things.
And one of the things we're hoping we might be able to do is, WSU years ago had the big grand challenges, right? Like, we thought, well, why not kind of switch that around and think about what are local needs and make them Pullman-based challenges, right? Why not come together to, why not have the business community work with the Carson College to deal with a very, a series of issues or challenges? Why not have local challenges? I mean, we can't solve food insecurity for the world, but we should be able to solve food insecurity in Pullman. And so the idea is that if we can bring the university resources and the ingenuity and the commitment and compassion that the Pullman community has, we can solve a lot of challenges. We just have to build an infrastructure around it. So we hope that the fellowship is kind of a start to that, proof in concept.
And so I think what really sets it apart is that it's a frustration that I've had my entire career is when I go to training and the conferences, all of the research is based upon large law enforcement agencies, and researchers need those numbers for their research, and I get it. But sometimes it's really hard to translate some research from a large agency to a smaller agency that does not have the resources. And so it's been difficult to find those that will work with the smaller agencies because they just don't see the benefit out of it. And so that's been the good thing about work with Dr. Macon, is that he's willing to do that with the smaller agencies. And there's actually a lot more smaller agencies across the country than there are larger agencies. And so there's really a lot more benefit that we can get even nationwide in law enforcement. So I really appreciate the work that he does, and it's hopefully it's a trend that we'll see.
Can I add something? Is anyone a part of like the Downtown Association? Okay, so there's a sort of a new partnership with WSU Architecture Program and sort of like the Downtown Association, but they now have 2 classes at WSU where they help the Downtown Association. So one class, they actually pitched the idea of introducing like a luxury hotel where Mimosa is. So that's really cool. And now there's a new architecture program where they're looking to connect, campus where the heating plant is and WSU Visitor Center. And I know they have like an open forum for community members. So if you're interested in that, I'd suggest looking online and maybe giving some input for that.
The Gateway Project.
Yeah, the Gateway. Yep.
Condos.
And so you talk about the study and stuff. Is that all stuff that's eventually going to be like published to other agencies and stuff can access it, or?
Well, Dr. Macon has published some already.
Okay.
Yeah, the idea is to be transparent, create, these initiatives that allow other agencies to replicate exactly what we do. I mean, having Moscow PD join is going to be tremendous because then we'll have both agencies' data. We'll be able to look at the different, so if Moscow is able to implement those new crosswalks that they want, we could then study that and see, does that have an impact? And then I think it gives us we're more confident in our recommendations that we give the city because we have a really good comparison. I think that's it, is open up. The agencies have such great data, but they just haven't had the time and the resources to actually act on it. And so being able to work with Megan, who's been tremendous, and she has spent the last 4 months working just with the data. So it's been great. But if there are questions that you want to know, like actions, probably figure out a way to make that happen. So I think a part of what I'd like to see this evolve is that as a committee, if there are data questions that we have, or you want to, understand more about red lights or whatever it is, that's what I'm trying to help Megan see the value of is this type of data. Because we almost always focus on Seattle's and the NYPD. We get really excited because you go, they have 40,000 police officers. I want to study that versus they have 35 police. You know what I mean? Like, so trying to get people to see the real value of this type of data. Because you can be much more nimble and responsive with a community this size.
So how do we start having that conversation? Because we only meet once a month. So do you see us bringing that up at the meeting, or is there another way for us to contact and say, hey, I was thinking about this, what are your thoughts?
I would love to see it here, right? I mean, make it a part of what the committee does, and that we have those types of questions. I mean, it's a fellowship for public safety. We're here to talk about public safety. And I think it gives us an agenda item that we can throw our own ideas. I can't promise that we can act on all of them, but being able to have some data questions that we can, particularly if we already have it, I think it gives us an opportunity to just have a conversation about them and to help have the chief weigh in and others to say, well, you know, this would be a priority area for us. We really want to look at this. Because we have the list from the chief, but it'd be really helpful to have insight from the committee to say, yeah, I absolutely agree. This should be a priority area and get more voices.
It would also be a really good thing for when we're trying to recruit faculty and staff to come to Pullman, if we can show data on not only just crime statistics, but just other different things of safety. So you talk about the red light and all that stuff, is being able to show that we can say, oh my gosh, this is such a safe city. Well, let's see the data that can back up everything. Looking at that, putting that on the agenda for us to discuss, I think that would be really good. Because I would like to see, you know, what do we have, especially for, you know, we've been talking about this red light for a while, but what does the data show versus summer to when the students are here? Is there really a difference, or is it just us saying, it took me 3 more minutes to get home?
There's absolutely a difference.
So it'd be nice to see what that looks like instead of us just discussing that, yes, there's a difference, but what is that data, what does that number show us?
And new ways, so one of the things that Megan wants to learn is GIS, so we're going to cover that, and also new data visualization. So I think sometimes we build bar charts, but there's so much more effective graphics that we can build. They just look pretty, right? And that you can drag. I'm all about interactive displays, and so there's like this whole thing in data visualization that we can help get on the Pullman Police website so that they can, you know, where do you live? And you could just pop up and say, well, this is what you're generally seeing. So really making it about the different hills and different locations. And so I think that it's more meaningful to people, right? Like crime in Pullman is okay, but like what's crime in my area? More importantly, like what's visibility in my area? So getting people to think instead of crime, maybe it's about visibility and that. Like there's different ways we can model data that's helpful to people. And it's going to vary by stakeholder and constituent. So.
Even the median age, like if I know I'm moving next to some rock and rollers and partiers, all that, I want the quiet hill. Like, I would love to, you know, I mean, seriously, I've read, and I would love to know where's the heavy saturation, especially if I'm new and I don't know what Apartment Hill is. I have no clue. So it'd be neat to see that.
You can imagine dragging it, right? Like,
And fair housing has a big deal to do with that, because we as realtors have to be very careful about what we say, even about the college community, because that can be age discrimination. So, so the more data that we can say, oh, go here, the better.
percentage of noise violations.
Yes.
Per
There you
call.
go.
And you could just imagine just dragging it. You're like, I just want to know where you just picked the crime. It's like, it just, oh, I can see it. It'd be pretty.
So, anything else about data? We can put that onto the next meeting's agenda and come up with all a bunch of ideas that we would like to have Megan work on.
You say that, but that's literally her job. That's my job to teach her how to do these things, so it works out.
Okay, any public comment? All right, so our next meeting is March 9th. Do we have a speaker for March 9th?
I was just going to ask what kind of presentation you want. Topic. The last two that we still have on our list, doesn't mean we can't add to it or change it, was active shooter, civilian training and police response, and then bomb recognition and response.
Any thoughts? Ideas?
What about, is there any, I know for me, I deal with a lot of, well, I don't deal, that was horrible to say. I interact with a lot of students. And something about drug, like, is there any way to do some kind of drug abuse? Or, because I even interact with professional staff, and so sometimes they'll start going through things and just, I don't know, if looking at signs and looking at kind of resources and trying to figure out, you know, if I see a student struggling, how to ask the right questions, find the right resources. Is that appropriate?
So the person who's currently our school resource officer spent many years in the regional drug task force. And so he's able to kind of combine those two to help him with his current, position working in the schools. So I think he would be a good one he could do a presentation covering that, I think.
Does anybody else find use, or is that?
To me, like signs of how to recognize it, and if so, then what are the resources, or what to do, or?
Yeah, you're just looking for signs of possible drug use, possible drug abuse, alcohol, and just kind of what does that look like, and how do you have those conversations, and then where do you point them, and what can you say and not say? Because if they're bargaining you, there's certain things you can't say, certain things you can't do, and they may can't cover that, but just kind of unfolding that.
I think that'd be great.
Would it be possible to have the new officers come in and introduce themselves?
Oh, that would be good too, yeah.
So, and just talk about, one who they are, but talk about their experiences being a new officer. I think that sometimes people that are not involved in the profession maybe don't know, and it'd be nice to hear from them what their experience has been like, and being part of the Pullman community.
Why they wanted to go into this profession.
I think it'd be helpful.
That'd be good.
Here in Pullman.
Yes, here in Pullman. Why ever?
So we can get a commitment, they're not going to leave after you invest in them.
We can have a contract written up. Fine.
You have what, 5?
New, like with less than
a year
on. Well, yeah. Kayla's in training. Joseph's going to the academy.
Ashley and Bree just got out of
Right. Yeah. No. So we've got 3.
On top of that, Love and Holden are both relatively new.
Yeah. So between them, we can probably get a few here.
Out of curiosity, do you ever do anything community-wise, or anything introducing new officers, or anything like that?
The closest we get to that is when we do like a new officer swearing in, we live stream it on Facebook.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Other than that, we don't have like anything public.
Okay.
I like the idea of the announcing. I mean, I love your idea as well. I like the idea of bringing in the new officers and just kind of making it a big thing to be come meet your new officers and hear their story, and I think that'd be good.
All right, we'll do that. Want to do that next meeting then?
Yeah, and then we can set it for the next one for.
I was throwing something out there. Yeah, I like that one. That's very that's good.
But that way we can give him some more lead time to put up a good presentation.
We can find out with Mental Health Awareness Month.
Okay.
Which is?
Is that in April?
It's April. So I was very hesitant with that. I like them.
So we did have, was it last year, we had 2 people from a local...
May.
Brett Meyer's wife.
NAMI? National Alliance for Mental Illness? Because there's a Pullman, Moscow has a Latol chapter of NAMI.
Well, they work for a local counseling center that
the
focused
counseling center
on
with
drug abuse.
The Palouse.
Not Palouse, it wasn't Palouse River Counseling, it was...
Well, I know they're NAMI representatives, and so they might be, I can even say they would definitely come in to talk about...
I just want to make sure we're not duplicating something that we've had recently, but it doesn't sound like having anybody...
We did that recently. I just don't know if it was last year or the year.
Well, we did suicide stuff quite recently.
We did.
But we didn't do really anything about the drug and alcohol abuse and how to recognize it and the resources.
Yeah,
we didn't really
that's a
do that.
different
There was,
angle.
What did we do?
All right, well, we'll get some new officers here next month.
Okay.
Great. All right, anything else? All right, well, thank you very much for coming. We'll see you March 9th.
All right.